So following my introduction, we'll hear from Lloyd at National Gas, who's going to talk to us about the hydrogen deblending program. We'll have a brief comms update from Amy before we do some breakout sessions. I think these worked really well at the last meeting, were really well received, so we're keen to kind of make that a regular occurrence now. And we'll then have 3 presentations from our member organizations, so CR+, Summit Energy and Swagelok, before we then do a wrap up and some questions. So Swagelok and CR Plus are actually both new members to the consortium, so welcome to those. I'd normally do a little bit of a brief intro, kind of overview of those organizations, but as they're speaking later on, I'll kind of leave it at that. But that's kind of how our current landscape looks of kind of all the organizations and collaborators within the Hydrogen Valley program today. I do think it's worthwhile, though, just doing a very brief recap of kind of what the Hydrogen Valley program is. Conscious that stakeholders can change within organisations, and we've also obviously got some new organisations that have joined us. I think for me, one of the main aims of the program is to kickstart the hydrogen economy within the project area, so kind of within that geography you can see on the screen. And I think really that begins with meetings like this, right? So bringing together all the key stakeholders, whether that's industries on the demand side, transporters, producers, local authorities, the list goes on. I think as I've been reflecting though a little bit more recently, whilst that aim absolutely holds true, I think the use of the term kickstart, I think conjures up, kind of very tangible ideas of, starting to build the pipelines or kind of getting production in the area. And I think, again, those things do hold true, but I think we also need to be a little bit realistic that this is quite a long journey that we're on. I was in a meeting this morning with the Black Country Industrial Cluster, and West Midlands Combined Authority and other energy companies talking about decarbonisation more generally. And I think what really came out of that, and it's nothing new, is that this region does have its challenges. I think the industry is generally really quite dispersed, and it's also quite smaller scale as well as far as energy usage, of course, generally. When we compare to the big industrial clusters in the northeast or northwest. So I think it's really important that one of the key priorities for the consortium and for this program is, in the first instance, just to define that demand. And I talked about that at the last meeting, but really just trying to get a clear picture of what that industrial demand looks like. And we've taken a first cut of that. We've kind of got that first picture now, and that's been shared with government, so Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and also NESO. Because it is going to be ultimately those parties which allocate the funding and prioritize the areas for hydrogen development. So that's kind of where we're at as far as the program. We also talked about kind of where the hydrogen might come from, and there's multiple options on the table as we look kind of further down the line. Of course, one of those will be the Bacton Hub via Project Union. And it'd be great to hear from Richard and Iona on that a little bit later on. But I think it's also worth bearing in mind the neighbouring hydrogen projects that are taking place. If you're at the East Midlands Hydrogen Summit last week, then you'd already know this. But for those that weren't, there's now an updated East Coast hydrogen pipeline route. And what that now looks like is bringing hydrogen further south into the Midlands at kind of an accelerated timeline. I think for us in the Hydrogen Valley area, that's a really exciting development. The closer the hydrogen infrastructure gets to us, the more tangible I think kind of potential future extensions, etc., start to feel. So that's where we're at in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions in the chat or in the breakout rooms later on that. But for now, I will hand over to Amy for a comms update.
Hi all, I'm Amy and I'm part of the comms team at Talon. So I support on the marketing and comms work for the Hydrogen Valley programme. I'm just going to provide a quick update on the communications front. So as Aaron mentioned, it's great to see our membership base continuing to grow, which is a great reflection of the increasing momentum and interest in the programme. So you can see here some examples of members featured on our website, where we've been regularly updating your bios and logos to showcase the breadth and diversity of our consortium. And we're also using the site to share the latest development in the hydrogen space, as well as member news. So if you have any exciting updates or hydrogen related projects in the pipeline, please do send them our way. The same goes for LinkedIn. It's been brilliant to see the steady growth of our LinkedIn page since we launched it last year. We now have 572 followers and growing, with a 13% increase in followers since our last meeting, which is really great to see. So if you haven't already, I'd really encourage you to follow the page. It's a great way to stay up to date with programme milestones, key announcements, and member highlights. We regularly post updates on there, so it'd be great if you can engage, tag, and share your news with us so that we can share it with our network. You can see some examples of our LinkedIn posts there. In our latest consortium meeting, attendees were sort of keen to connect and continue their discussions after the meeting. So we've also created a dedicated LinkedIn group for this. This is a space where members can collaborate and share ideas. So please do feel free to share any hydrogen related news or initiatives or partnership opportunities you're working on there. So I'll drop both the link to the page and the LinkedIn group in the chat shortly. On the comm side, one of our other main focuses has been building out the website with fresh content. So some of the recent additions include publishing the newsletter from our summer consortium meeting, the blog that we developed from our member case study responses, as well as multiple member case studies. We've also got a blog on the UK's hydrogen landscape, and this week we'll also be publishing our latest blog on combating hydrogen myths.
I'll now pass over to Lloyd, who's going to talk us through the hydrogen deblending program. So over to you, Lloyd.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Lloyd Mitchell. I'm the Innovation Demonstration Manager at National Gas, so responsible for turning our kind of evidence gathering work mainly around repurposing our existing system to go to hydrogen, but also looking at the capabilities of us in terms of transporting hydrogen with new pipelines, and how that specifically, this presentation, how that relates to how we might support the transport sector with decarbonising. So if you just go to the next slide, please. So just a very quick overview for those of you who don't know, National Gas own and operate the gas transmission system in the UK, which is the high pressure, large diameter pipe that connects the producers of gas, so North Sea LNG terminals, etc., to major industrial users, power stations and distribution networks. We've got 7,500 kilometers of pipe and 60 or 70 odd compressors across 21 sites across the country, which basically just push the gas around the country. And about, I think, 99% of the gas that goes through comes through the UK, comes through the gas transmission system. So if we go on to the next slide, you probably will have heard talk of this before, but as National Gas, we are taking a 3-molecule approach to decarbonising our system. So we're looking at hydrogen blending, and that's primarily to try and increase the amount of hydrogen supply that's available to de-risk investments for hydrogen producers, so they've always got somewhere to send the hydrogen. We are looking at 100% hydrogen pipelines, so Project Union and East Coast, which I'm sure you're all well aware of, converting sections of the network or building new where necessary, whilst maintaining that resilience in the existing natural gas system. And we're also looking at CO2, where there's certain parts of the network can transition to CO2 to help support industrial carbon capture. Particularly, we're looking at whether we can convert one of the feeders up in North Scotland to take industrial emissions from the industrial belt in Scotland up to St Fergus and out to be stored in the North Sea. So at the high level of what we're looking at as an organisation in terms of supporting decarbonisation. If you go to the next slide, please. So in order to achieve that, we needed to be certain that we were able to operate a hydrogen pipeline system, whether that's repurposed or new. We've mostly focused our research work on repurposing existing pipelines. And to that end, we built the Future Grid Hydrogen Test Facility, which is up in Spade Adam in Cumbria. And the purpose of this was to understand the capability of the existing system to transport hydrogen. So all of the assets you see on that site there are assets that have seen service across the network, 10, 20, 30 years. And that's a really useful test bed. We tested it with hydrogen 2, 5, 20, 100% and got really good results showing that our system is capable of transporting hydrogen, which is obviously good news. And so if we move on to the next slide, which is kind of more getting into the meat of what I'm talking about. So we wanted to develop that further. We obviously got really good evidence around the capability of the system to transport hydrogen. But we wanted to understand the specific use cases. So at the moment, we're focused on power users, and we've had lots of conversations with power stations about transitioning to hydrogen. We're focused on large industrial users, and likewise we have had a lot of conversations with them. But one area that we hadn't really explored previously was hydrogen for transport, which is a pretty nascent industry as it stands. There's not really much development that's happened here, mainly because there's just not the hydrogen capacity in the UK at the moment. So we actually had on loan a Vauxhall Vivaro hydrogen, and it was quite an experience trying to get that around the country. We wanted to take it to a few different sites, but almost all of the hydrogen refueling stations in the country are out of operation because there's a perennial chicken and egg problem. I think it's, well, you have that in the wider hydrogen industry, but I think it's particularly acute in hydrogen transport in that there are no major users of hydrogen vehicles because there's no significant access to hydrogen to supply the vehicles, but there's no investment in access to hydrogen because there's no demand for it. And so it's probably a problem you're familiar with, but the hydrogen transport industry have really been suffering with this. One of the reasons for that is that it is very difficult to transport hydrogen. So whereas you might have one or two deliveries a week with petrol and diesel to a filling station at the moment, you'd be looking at 10 tankers a day to transport the equivalent amount of hydrogen because it's so light, and that is obviously not practical. And so we wanted to help them explore other ways of accessing hydrogen. Enter in, this concept of supplying hydrogen directly to refueling stations from the national transmission system. This would do so at lower cost because it's cheaper to move a gas through a pipeline than it is through road tankers, and it would do it with much higher reliability because you have a constant supply and you're not reliant on a tanker coming and filling back up your tanks multiple times a day potentially. So we wanted to explore this concept. We developed the technology concept, which you can see here. So we have the national transmission system, the Future Grid facility, which represents the national transmission system, kind of in the middle there. And this concept applies to both the blending scenario and the 100% hydrogen scenario. So for the first scenario, you would have a deblending unit which could extract the hydrogen out of that blended gas stream up to a kind of 98 nominal % purity. That would then send it to the electrochemical hydrogen compression system, which simultaneously compresses the hydrogen up to you can have as high as 700 bar, which is what many vehicles take. And simultaneously purifies that hydrogen to fuel cell grade with no moving parts. So it's a very kind of new technology that we're demonstrating, but it could be quite useful in this space. And then that supplies it to the hydrogen refueling station, which can be used to fuel cell vehicles. So really we wanted to expand our existing facility to demonstrate this concept of supporting hydrogen refueling, and show that it could be done via our network. So that's the concept. If we move on to the next slide, this just breaks that down in a little bit more detail. So you can see you've got the bulk separation system that takes the hydrogen out. In this case, we've got a 200 kg a day system. And the second system, as I said, purification, compression, and then the refueling station. And you can have a bit look at these slides. I'm sure they'll be sent out later on. So if we move to the next slide, please. So that's the concept, but we wanted to understand to what extent can this be rolled out across the network? What's the appetite? Where's the potential demand going to come from? So what we did was we commissioned ERM consultancy to look at where is the potential demand for hydrogen vehicles most highly concentrated, and how does that map against our network? And that's the map you see there in front of you. We focused on heavy transport. As I think you'll be aware, electrification of cars is well on its way. We don't see much of a role for hydrogen in passenger vehicles, but electrification of heavier vehicles is more difficult. And so we're focusing our efforts on the heavier end of the transport spectrum, things like HGVs, freight rail, potentially aviation, but that's on a much longer time horizon, and maritime as well. So we want to look at how that potential demand mapped across our network, and we developed a rollout strategy that lays that out in quite a lot of detail that's publicly available if you wanted to have a look at that. Then if you go on to the next slide, and this is just to say that we worked with a huge number of stakeholders on this piece of work. A lot of the feedback we got from transport operators and refueling station operators is that we want this system yesterday. Unfortunately, it is dependent on the rollout of hydrogen networks more broadly, which obviously you guys are involved with, and so unfortunately we can't provide this in the kind of timescales they want. But I think it's definitely a concept worth developing for the future development of hydrogen and to support future decarbonisation of transport. So we've had a lot of interested organisations across different sectors. That includes vehicle OEMs. We've got JCB coming up to the site in a few weeks. In fact, they've developed their own hydrogen digger. Non-road mobile machinery is one we've been looking at quite closely because that's very difficult to electrify. Aviation and rail, we've had lots of research organisations interested, and there are quite a lot of businesses involved in the refueling and hydrogen production space. There are a lot of them have been kind of in quite a tough time recently, I'd say. I think the winds keep shifting within hydrogen transport, particularly with Trump getting into power in the US, which stymied some of the investment that was going on in the area. But anyway, that is to say, so we've developed this concept. We're currently in the phase of building out that test facility and getting all the equipment on there, and simultaneously we're looking at in more detail that rollout strategy and looking at the commercialization. So what would this look like in a commercial sense? Who owns the equipment? What kind of scale would you need for this to be viable? Things like that. And the project is looking to finish probably sort of the end of next year. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm not sure if we've got any time for questions, but happy to take any if we do.
Anyone's quick. I think I just very quickly on the DE blending side of things, kind of how is that looking, kind of economics, commercially side of things? Like, is it going to really increase the price to the end user, kind of that DE blending process?
Potentially. So when we first started this project, a lot of the talk was around 20% hydrogen blending, including at transmission. I think we have shifted our perspective to focus, at least in the near term, on 5% hydrogen blending. And at the lower, the less hydrogen there is in the gas stream, the more expensive it is to extract out. And so I think the focus of this project has probably shifted, more towards the 100% hydrogen pipeline case. as time has gone on. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, see, so that was that. I think you almost with your last sentence kind of went some way to answering my question. So that with the test case 2% having happened already, bit of pushback from some industrials who are potential users of hydrogen, that 100% hydrogen network is their preferred way to go. Is there any kind of time target, on, let's say, a 5% hydrogen blend, if that's the aspiration, being the case?
I say we're not targeting a blend as such. The focus was to basically change the regulations that govern what the gas composition can be in the network. Because at the moment we're limited to 0.1% hydrogen by GSMR. And so we wanted to open up that capacity for hydrogen producers to make sure they have somewhere to send the hydrogen. So it wasn't necessarily targeting a percentage. We'd be happy for it to be lower. It was just to make sure that all the hydrogen that is produced in the country has somewhere to go.
Yeah, and not targeting a time for that. I think my question was more of a time horizon one, that if the work that you're doing now says 5%'s okay, then what is it that would sit between that and that being something, that moment in time and it being rolled out of 5% into the grid?
Yeah, okay. So we're currently, there's a consultation that we returned that's currently being considered by DESNZ, and we're expecting that, I believe, in December, which should provide some more clarity. And then if that was a positive decision, there are certain investments that we'd have to make. There's not a huge amount that would need to change 5%, but probably looking at late 2020s, to be blend ready effectively.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks very much, Lloyd.
Thank you.
We can now move over to Andrew from CR+.
Hi, everyone.
Andrew.
So I'm Andrew Price. I'm a director at CR+. We're an energy engineering consultancy company. I think I've got like an introduction to CR+ slide if you move it on. Yeah, okay. So we are quite, relatively small, independently owned consultancy, which I think makes us quite agile, flexible when we are dealing with our clients. We work typically from the heavy industry manufacturing perspective, and we've worked a lot with the clusters over the last few years. So with the South Wales Industrial Cluster, where I'm based, and colleagues in the Black Country, as well as then moving on through the LIDPs up in Bradford and the west of England. So you move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so really we're working with the clusters. What we've probably done is tried to combine the top-down sort of strategic view around what that sort of business investment strategy is, with what do the sites need to do themselves on their decarbonisation journey. On the right hand side, you've got the cogs and routes diagram that we came up with in South Wales, and that's all about what a business can do. So number one would be energy efficiency. Number two would be fuel switching. Number three was what we call clean growth hubs. So that's localized solutions where you're sort of squeezing out the most value that you can from whether it's byproducts or shared networks, infrastructure, that sort of thing. Number four was carbon capture utilization. Number five is then storage at the end. And really what we tried to develop was that bottom up, where you've got that little triangle, what the sites can do, all the way then up to link it with that strategy. So if you go to the next slide, please. And just as a highly caveated sort of profile. This is a typical site that we're seeing, you know, mid-size sort of site of nearly 20,000 tons. So you've got the energy efficiency measures, which are sort of driving down that initial carbon and cost, then going to a fuel switched solution, which is, in this case, could be subsidized with, say, the HAR3 business model or an electrification business model, if that materializes, would then potentially an increase in OPEX where either subsidy disappears either through time, it's the end of it, or whether perhaps the reference price then overtakes your strike price and you end up paying a little bit more. Obviously, this is highly caveated. I just want to make that clear. And on this case, there was some residual carbon capture required, which also increases some cost there. So if you go to the next slide, please. And as I was saying, with the bottom-up approach, so we've actually gone and surveyed probably over 100 businesses to see what they can do, and what that basically has led to is a bit more of what the business can do technically, what it's likely to do, what its other options are, and it's also in the context of what's going on in the area, in the region. The top right figure is basically, it's a pathway graphic in terms of electrification versus hydrogen, with lots of different factors built into that. So below the line is like the more high confidence sort of likelihood pathway, and then above that is the more caveated. We could go this way, could go that way, depending on policy or other factors. And what this information enables is that conversation with the networks, and it means that there's some, you've got your I don't like to use the word certainty, but there's some confidence, and you're also then highlighting what the uncertainty is. So what's your range of pathways? And that's going back to what Aaron sort of said at the start, was about that defining that demand is a big challenge, and we think that this sort of detailed survey approach is helping to solve that challenge. I mean, some of my colleagues today are in a site in the West Midlands, looking at exactly this sort of thing. So if you could move to the next slide, please. So those surveys then create the opportunities, and how do you sort of turn those opportunities into real projects? Well, in this case, there's an example of the steelworks in Cardiff where we helped to get that the funding required, the capex to convert the one of the reheat furnaces to hydrogen, and that's sort of supported by the detailed engineering, really. So that's for a hydrogen fuel switch for combustion plant, and we support a PhD student who's actually just finished his PhD probably a couple of weeks ago, and will be joining us shortly to basically to de-risk the process change of hydrogen combustion. If you just move on to the next slide. So that's Ben, who's going to be joining us in a few weeks. And what his PhD was all about was actually based on the Steelworks project, understanding what some of the challenges and risk areas might be in terms of what the impact is of changing the fuel composition on heat transfer and essentially on product quality, which is the ultimate sort of thing you want to make sure you keep as it should be. If you just move on to the next slide. Yeah, so that's pretty much the end of the PowerPoint. I just wanted to give a little bit on on some of the work that we've been doing and are still doing in the Black Country, as well as other regions, and then how some of those projects, especially in fuel switching, can then access funding. And one of the conversations we had on the breakout room, and I'll shut up in a sec. One of the conversations we had in the breakout room was about where is that support for businesses now. That's one of the biggest barriers. The likes of IETF is no longer there. So yeah, hopefully we'll see something a bit more positive shortly in terms of funding for this for the end users who are going to be the key off takers for this fuel switch. Because at the moment there's very little certainty, and it's hard to invest whether you're an off taker or if you're the generator or the network in the middle. There's not a lot of certainty at the moment. And that's all. Thanks.
No, completely agree with a lot of your points there, Andrew. I think that was really interesting. And that approach, I think we're completely aligned as far as kind of collating the requirements and then ultimately helping and looking at what those different decarbonisation pathways are, right? We recognise that there isn't going to be a one size fits all, so I think we've got to be pragmatic about all the solutions on the table. Any questions for Andrew before we move on? Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now very pleased to hand over to Richard and Iona, who are going to give us an update on the Bacton Hub. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I think I'll kick off first and then hand over to Richard. So just by way of introduction, I'm Iona Page. I'm a project manager with Progressive Energy, and we are working in conjunction with Richard, who is the project director for Summit Energy Evolution, both of which I'll kind of share an overview with shortly. But jointly, we are looking to develop the Bacton Hydrogen Hub. But you can move to the next slide, please, Aaron. Again, please. So just for those of you who haven't perhaps seen one of our previous presentations on it, BH2, the Bacton Hydrogen Hub, is a joint venture between Summit, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sumitomo Corporation, and Progressive Energy. Summit lead the kind of energy transition for Sumitomo across Europe and got multiple projects. But from a UK standpoint, they've got the Bacton Hydrogen project. They are an investment partner in Orion, which is a carbon capture store in the northeast, and they've also got Peat Cluster, which is a project looking at decarbonising cement production across the Peat District. From a Progressive Energy standpoint, it's a project development company, and Progressive Energy were the original originators of the HyNet project, which is the kind of flagship hydrogen and CCS project within the northwest. We can move to the next slide, please, Aaron. So first off, why Bacton? I think it was alluded towards in some of the early presentations and discussions. It's not your standard industrial hub. It's not somewhere you think of, oh, North Norfolk, when you think of industry and decarbonisation, but it actually has a lot to go for and a lot of opportunity to seize in that transition to net zero. Sorry, if we just go back one, please. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, in 2020, the NSTA asked the question as to what role Bacton will be in the transition to net zero, because at the moment it processes about a third of UK gas supply through Bacton. And because of its location and its proximity to gas feedstock, to potential cross-border opportunities, but also in the future potentially transitioning to green hydrogen from an offshore wind standpoint, there's a lot of supporting infrastructure, which means it can have a key role within that transition to net zero. So off the back of that, the NSTA set up what they referred to as a number of special interest groups with specific remits to really define what the opportunity was. Progressive Energy led the demand-based special interest group, and SEAL led the supply chain one. And it was off the back of that original work that the Bacton Hydrogen Hub has been developed. If we can just move to the next slide, please. So what specifically is the Bacton Hydrogen Hub? It is electrolytic blue CCS-enabled hydrogen production. And the reason we have started with blue hydrogen production is it's really an enabler to that transition in the future. And the intent is to utilise that existing infrastructure around the area to kind of bring the cost down and create kind of value for money and utilise that. We have had the original work looked at kind of 300 megawatts HHV capacity. Through our discussions across the region, we've actually increased that to a 600 megawatt facility. So that's the intent there, and against that kind of data sheet in terms of development. We can move to the next slide, please, Alan. So this was an interesting slide that we kind of thought about, what are we really focusing on at the moment? And it probably leads on from some of the kind of breakout questions in terms of what are the current barriers to seeing kind of the hydrogen market evolve. And hence, you know, our main priorities for this year are really some of those peripheral activities, really defining where the demand is. If you think about the kind of global hydrogen market, a number of projects are failing on kind of that certainty of offtake. Who is actually going to utilise that hydrogen? Where is that CO2 going to be transported and stored? And how do we make that from a money perspective, and really working on that certainty from a government support package. At the moment, the CCS-enabled blue hydrogen projects all fall under cluster, this cluster approach, that we need certainty over the next year to really understand from a government standpoint, how do you access those business models as we move from a cluster to a more of a portfolio approach. Hydrogen transportation is going to be key, and later in the presentation I'll give an overview on that. But also we need to really focus on where we're actually going to site the facility itself around the Bacton and adjacent to the existing terminal operations. So they are really enabling activities over the next year. We can just move on, please, Alan. So as I said, transport options, we are quite fortuitous from a Bacton standpoint. We're obviously discussing with you today from a Hydrogen Valley standpoint, which is a kind of adjacent activity which we will look to utilise. But also, as was mentioned earlier, from a national gas standpoint, we're located, Bacton is connected to 5 feeders. So the intent will be to work with Project Union as they look to repurpose the feeders, or one of those feeders, to hydrogen. So that will give us the opportunity to transport the hydrogen to those smaller industrial hubs across the region. We move on again, please. So as I mentioned, we need to really be focusing on demand. We have a number of kind of key clusters of demand, one being the Bacton terminal. How do they potentially look to decarbonise, and hydrogen option for them? We have the evolving Fenlands cluster, which actually we're working on with CR+, and that's kind of working with a number of the smaller industrial off-takers who may be able to use hydrogen to decarbonise that. We're obviously working synergy with Hydrogen East, which are they're looking at kind of wider opportunities from a hydrogen standpoint, and then obviously today from a Hydrogen Valley standpoint. So we're just evolving that demand and creating that certainty, and looking at kind of that full chain offering across the value chain. And I will hand now over to Richard to go into some of the more granular details from the project standpoint.
Thanks, Iona. Yeah, to put it into context in terms of our JV, I think we speak nearly every day. So as a JV partnership, that's Iona and I, that is, we run a very tight project between us in terms of delivering this between Seal and Progressive. And to date, it's proving to be a very successful JV, and also some of the other presenters on this call, namely CR+, we're dealing with them closely for potential formation of a cluster that actually is mentioned here on Iona's last slide, in terms of what we've coined the Fenlands cluster, is a burgeoning cluster of industrial and more and more leaning towards hydrogen, also for the hydrogen to power market, which is going to be part of what I'm going to talk about more. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the left-hand side of this slide, these numbers will change all of the time. These were government targets, still are government targets. But as we all know on this call, we've got the government hydrogen strategy refreshment coming up this year. So it'll be very interesting to see how these targets change, because they probably will do. But no matter what that change is, we within our project harbour the belief and the insight that although low carbon hydrogen is low carbon hydrogen and a molecule of hydrogen doesn't really care where it comes from too much, when it comes to the cost and the rollout of hydrogen, it doesn't have to be a competition between blue and green. It just is low carbon hydrogen. But I just wanted to put a bit of a stamp on understanding the scale of the project that we want to do at Bacton, because Bacton has the ingredients to deliver that. Is we're looking to do a 600 megawatt hydrogen project at Bacton, and therefore contextualizing that's 4 times the size of all of the HAR1 awards for green hydrogen. We can also produce that at less than 1/3 of the cost ton for a ton of 1 ton of blue hydrogen for 1 ton of green hydrogen. Therefore, any support that's required by the UK government and investment from the private sector investors is going to be 1/3 of the amount of money for the same volume of hydrogen. So we're a very investable project. On the right hand side, what we see here is that we're talking to Hydrogen Valley today. So we can argue that Hydrogen Valley does sit within that yellow circle. We would consider that to be a tier 2/tier 3 off-taker, because to enable a project, what we require an anchor off-take that we can actually be signed up to and then signed up to us, such that we can make the investment to make the hydrogen in the first place. And to do that means that we need to have very close collaboration with the other stakeholders in our area, which we do have, and a little bit more about that in a second. So we have what we would consider to be our anchor offtake, which is effectively a red spot around Bacton. We then have our next tier of offtake, which would be regional, East Anglian. I was quite interested to see there. I don't think it would have been news to me, but interested to see from the presentation on basically the heat map for the potential of hydrogen use in heavy machinery. So you know, whether that be buses, lorries, transportation, and indeed farm machinery. And we could see that the East Anglia region was quite a reasonable hotspot for that, and we do have our eye on that in terms of the use of hydrogen for and have a refueling station, maybe even at Bacton, to service that market. But then wider beyond our anchor offtake and beyond the transmission system that is enabled by our anchor offtake, we then get into the likes of Hydrogen Valley, where we move beyond our immediate offtake and we move into then either blended scenarios or into 100% hydrogen networks, which is exactly what the likes of Cadent are working on and investigating in terms of where the hydrogen hotspots are for otherwise hard to abate industry in the region through electrification or other. So Cadent and NISO are working on that, and we are keen to see the results of that as they come out, because that is effectively our revenue demand market that we're looking at. The grey spot off to the right hand side, the other end of the 2 blue lines that I've put on this exceptionally complicated map, those are the interconnectors that also make Bacton unique in the UK. We are already connected via natural gas interconnectors with both Holland and Belgium, and it's in the fullness of time. We could say arguably, but it's not really an arguable case, that we will at some point be connected by CO2 pipelines, and we will be connected by hydrogen pipelines as well. So from the point of view of where we are, Bacton sits reasonably at the epicenter of the prospect of both Europe from a CCS store enablement point of view. If you're making blue hydrogen, we need to effectively take methane, and we need somewhere to put the carbon, and then we need a customer for the hydrogen. And we've got both of that where Bacton sits. from an offtake market and from a CO2 store market. Next slide, please. So this is what we've got to do to solve the problem. So although where we're sitting, as we've just seen from the previous slide, is in a fairly pretty spot, at the middle of this diagram, that's the Bacton project. So that's Bacton BH2, the hydrogen hub that we've identified through the earlier special interest group work that was done. Everything else on this chart, block diagram, is what we've put in place since. So obviously there'd be a futility to running all of the way around it unless we were actually sitting in a room looking to sign a contract with one another anytime soon. But effectively, we've got feedstocks coming into the project from the left-hand side in the form of utility power and natural gas. And on the right-hand side, we have our offtake market and also our CO2 storage market. This is to give you an idea of the number of commercial agreements that we have in place to date, the number of stakeholders that we're dealing with. And although these are some of the main ingredients of the project, each of these building blocks of the project does have options as well. So for instance, where we see the CO2 transportation, so from a conditioning perspective, then transportation to a store, we're dealing with several potential off-takers of CO2. And so there are several meetings that we have to have. Likewise, on the hydrogen side, we have options for transportation. We have our preferred option, but nonetheless, we have more than one route that we can go. We have 4 potential feedstock sources, from natural gas coming directly in from the North Sea, from basically Southern North Sea Platform exported gas. We could also take it from the grid. We could use LNG gas, depending upon the latitude that we get from the low carbon hydrogen business model and the low carbon hydrogen standard. So we can see that there's an awful lot that we're working on to do that. If we move to the next slide, can then show you effectively why we need to do that. So I've entitled this slide Collaboration. Do we see collaboration as an opportunity, or do we see collaboration as a necessity? I would argue that when we're looking at a nascent market like the hydrogen market, that it is absolutely a necessity. So we have all of our stakeholders that we've just seen on the previous chart on down the left-hand side of this slide. From the demand side, getting the hydrogen from A to B through a transmission network, then the companies and stakeholders that we're reliant upon in order to be able to develop blue hydrogen in the first place. And then we've got our CO2 offtake, and that's to list but a few. Then we've got the blue bar here, which says lots and lots and lots of work. And so I did this yesterday evening. I was thinking there has been lots and lots and lots of work and continues to be so. And the reason for that is because the collaboration that we have on the project with all of these stakeholders allows us to take a full value chain solution to the government. The government is the big sponge in the middle of this slide because that's exactly what they are. So Bacton isn't the only project that they can do. There are a number of projects that are lining up to be supported in the post-track projects. So the government has an issue of allocation to consider. So the better the value chain and the more bang for buck we can offer the government, and therefore the more hydrogen offtake we can also demonstrate to the government, and the more carbonisation we can do, therefore we are more likely to be allocated a revenue support model by the government as they evolve. That ultimately leads to the government being able to supply business models to us. That creates a market, and then that allows us to get money from our investors in order to make a return, which is ultimately what we all need to do. Next slide, please. So blue hydrogen, for those who may not be fully aware, because sometimes the difference between green and blue hydrogen is often, although there isn't a difference in terms of what a molecule is, both come from low carbon hydrogen sources. Depending upon who you are, you might argue a little bit which way is slightly more decarbonised and which way isn't. I would argue that full life cycle, they're probably very much the same. But as it stands at the moment, we, when I say we, blue hydrogen projects are enabled by a what is a CCS related model known as the TRI model. That government TRI model is the government's network code for CO2 transportation from emission sources via a network to a site of storage. Out of that, because blue hydrogen is CCS enabled, we can then consider applying to the government for on the basis of the low carbon hydrogen business model for effectively what our revenue support model would be. But CO2 is enabled by the dispatchable power market, in other words, CCS gathered from CCS enabled power stations, also from energy waste, from industrial carbon capture. And so our aspirations of producing blue hydrogen at this moment in time, although it might change, are pinned to the fortunes of CCS because we're CCS enabled. However, that production of blue hydrogen then effectively goes into either an H2 network or an H2 closed loop system, which is an interesting bit of detail in the government's latest call for evidence for what is known as the capacity market for power generation. And that's where blue meets green, and they both come together, which is what is a hydrogen transport network, so that we can then have hydrogen end users, such as many of those who are hopefully listening to this call today. And so ultimately, we're sending hydrogen to industrial offtake, or hydrogen to power stations, or as we heard earlier from Future Grid, even right from Bacton source, which doesn't require a lot of this. We could be sticking hydrogen directly into the grid at some point, which obviously would be a very nice, easy solution for us, because where we're looking to make blue hydrogen at Bacton is literally the other side of the fence from national gas infrastructure, where the natural gas from the North Sea enters the grid anyway. So all of these are options for us, but this is just a snippet of what the business model maze is that we have to walk, and that doesn't actually have any of the low carbon hydrogen standard or low carbon hydrogen business model boxes on it as well. But this is what we need. This is why we do calls like this today, and this is what we need to further is our interaction with government, because government business models is going to unlock transmission and is going to unlock the further investment in scaled hydrogen. Next slide, please. This is just a quick one on our timelines. If we got after this project, we'll continue to get after it as we are, and if we got into some very meaningful engineering next year, then we could be delivering hydrogen at scale in this time frame. This time frame is pretty much split into two halves. One half runs to a final investment decision, which is at the point at which we would hopefully have full consenting in place from the government. Project of this scale, with everything else going on around it and the codependent projects, more than likely into central government consenting rather than local town and country planning. Typically 3 years as a stretch target to get a DCO in place, take final investment decision, and then we've got to build and commission the plant to then commencing commercial operations somewhere around 2031, 32, which is a timeline commensurate with the readiness of a hydrogen demand market. But we will see how that demand market is influenced by the business models that are coming along next year on transport, on storage, and also on hydrogen to power. Next slide, please. And this is just touching on hopefully something that is going to be affecting not only us, so we're based in Norfolk, but would be true for any cluster, whether it be Wales, Black Country, Hydrogen Valley, wherever it might be, and the number of benefits that we're bringing. So Bacton is a strategic site at the moment for the UK. It does land still over 30% of the natural gas into the UK, and so any infrastructure that has that sort of importance brings with it a very high level of skilled jobs. So we're looking to safeguard those, but also, you know, when I'm speaking for myself, we're financed from Tokyo, so we're also bringing significant investment into the country. Innovation and education is something we see with everything, vastly important, but we're also promoting that, and we are speaking with universities and utilities and other organizations in the region. The cross-border links, I think, have been clear from the infrastructure that we've just seen on the previous map. UK government, all important. We at Bacton, interestingly, sit actually between the land and the sea, and that is not just physical or figurative, that is actually industrially as well, because Bacton is a receiving station for natural gas in the North Sea and therefore sits underneath the remit from a regulatory point of view of the upstream industry. So from support, in terms of supporting the UK, we're supporting decarbonise and movement to clean power, both in upstream oil and gas production, enabling the better continuation of that industry, which is all important, but also helping to decarbonise Bacton assets and assets downstream of that, such as Hydrogen Valley. Energy security, I think, is a very important one. It's our project isn't about per se energy security. Our project needs to have an eye on preserving energy security while we make that transition of infrastructure from natural gas to hydrogen, and then indeed making the use of hydrogen as reliable as the use of natural gas, such that we're not affecting ultimately UK security to energy. So I think those benefits regionally to hydrogen projects, a lot of the reasons that we're looking to do it, but also ultimately, like any part of the value chain, we're looking to make a return on it. And to make a return, we did a demand side and an offtake, and that's exactly why it's very nice to be able to have the opportunity to speak today. So thank you very much, Caden, and Hydrogen Valley membership. We look forward to continuing to work with you for the rest of this year and into next year and beyond.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much, Richard and Iona. Really good to get that update. And yeah, of course, we'll continue to work together. I think particularly as we've discussed, kind of on that demand side. So really trying to define, what that demand is, and where it sits geographically, and then working, with yourselves, with National Gas to consider timelines and kind of best connection points, let's say. So yeah, any quick questions for Richard or Iona? I know we are a little bit pressed for time. Nope. Okay, great. Thank you again, both. I'll now pass over to Dewey from Swagelok.
Afternoon, all. Thanks firstly for having us talking today, and it's great to be part of the consortium. Yep, I'm Dewi Nicholson, and I'm part of the capital projects team as a key accounts manager at Swagelok Central UK. 2 slides forward, please. There we go. So, Swagelok have an expertise in all manner of fluid systems. Sorry, I've skipped this slide there. Yeah, that's the right one. Yeah, so a bit of background on Swagelok and what we offer. Prior to some clean energy specific applications. For those of you who haven't heard of us, Swagelok manufacture fluid system components and systems, and our headquarters is based in Cleveland, Ohio. Global growth has been seen through our core products using our patented twin ferromechanical grip design, alongside strategic acquisitions used to further expand our portfolio. We are the market leader in twin ferrule fluid system technologies, and it's to the point where a lot of industry members refer to twin ferrule fittings as Swagelok fittings. Using these alongside our threaded seals, our product range, which includes, but it's not limited to, fittings, valves, hoses, regulators, and many more small bore applications up to 2 inch. Although our headquarters are based in Cleveland, Ohio, we do have a site for manufacturing on the Isle of Man, and then the only other one is in China. However, nothing actually leaves China. That's only for the Chinese market. As a corporation, last year our sales were over $2 billion. That's across 200 Swagelok service centres, which are located across 70 countries worldwide. This allows us to offer global support for our customers in a local Swagelok service centre. Being a family-owned business, it allows us to be able to adapt quickly, which is brilliant within the clean energy market. We don't need any outside investment to make any changes or bring any new products out. We can adapt quickly to market changes. Next slide, please. So we have expertise in all manner of fluid systems. We are the optimal choice for reliability, safety and performance. This reputation has been built from over 75 years of trading history within critical applications. We use high quality materials and offer local technical and commercial support teams. Historically, our main markets have been oil and gas offshore, where you got very corrosive environments. So building upon that into the clean energy market, it works brilliantly with small molecule gases such as hydrogen and helium, just due to the quality of material required for offshore applications actually work closely with hydrogen in terms of working against hydrogen embrittlement. Our standard material is 316 stainless steel, and our mixture for 316 has actually got increased chromium and nickel composition, which is what's required for working against hydrogen embrittlement. In addition to leak-free solutions, we offer systems and components suitable for pressures up to 1050 bar. So this does cover most of the hydrogen market in terms of pressure requirements. There might be a few that go above this, but we do work in many different markets. We offer pre-assembled solutions and loose components, which all come with our limited lifetime warranty, which again showcases our trust in our product and quality. Once it's installed, using a straightforward and engageable installation procedure, we guarantee it will be leak-free within use. We also hold many certifications globally to support the industries we work in. So we've held and still hold EC79, although it's a bit less required now. Some customers still ask for it within the hydrogen market, and we've got other. Following this slide, there's a short video showing a collaboration we've worked with Luxfer Gas Cylinders for many years, who are a prominent name in the hydrogen sector, and they've been manufacturing and actually supplying their customers with solutions. So next slide, please. Right. Yeah. So onto some industry-specific applications where these are industries we've worked in. There's not too many examples where we can go too deep into, but if you've got any questions, please do reach out after this meeting. I'm sure the slides will be shared and my details will be on the last slide. So first of all, hydrogen vehicles and refueling. It's probably a topic that can align with quite a few people in this meeting, considering the location of the High Hull project. So additionally, refueling stations work at high pressures from 350 bar to 700 bar with local storage up to 950 bar. Therefore, we fit well within the upper limit of the scope to supply here. So we work closely in a lot of the AGIs in design because of the small bore. We only work with small bore systems up to 2-inch. The pipelines are a little bit out of scope, but in terms of the actual refueling stations, we have got the capacity, design experience, technical experience to assist here. Another thing to consider with refueling stations and vehicles is the purity of the hydrogen required. So it's grade D, which is 99.97% purity. Due to this, there is a requirement to sample the gas periodically to ensure you have got this purity. We've actually adapted one of our oil and gas sampling systems to now be hydrogen specific. So it's the same as we've used historically in that market, but all we've done is literally change some of the materials from our O-rings, inside the valves and so on to be hydrogen compatible. These do offer inline sampling. You can stay there, you can take out your sample, you can purge it, all simple use just to ensure you can take a clean sample. Next slide, please. So hydrogen storage and transportation. So for gas transportation, we have taken some steps recently in the last 2 years to get the recertification of our historically TPED products. So products that are pressurized and used on public roads used to have to be TPED accredited. Since the 1st of January 2023, this has changed to UK TPE. So TPED is the European standard. We've now got a UK specific standard. So we've got a range of products which are covered by UK TPE, so cylinders, valves, and further products which we can support you with for on public road applications. Hydrogen storage and transportation, again, it requires high pressures in line with our products and services. We work closely on AGIs for transportation and storage, and examples of applications we've worked on are MEG-C, so multi-element gas containers, and compressor systems for storage. Yeah, so these are applications where we've helped with design, supply, and delivery. So yeah, next slide, please. Hydrogen blending is quite a hot topic at the moment since the Brig Hydrogen trial. The gas utility networks within the UK are looking into this. National Gas have just successfully completed their Brig Hydrogen blending trial, where 2% hydrogen was blended in with National Gas to prove the concept of hydrogen blending at this level. We were proud to be part of this, so not only did we supply V8 and PIP2 certified components for the contractors and OEMs who were part of the project, we actually worked very closely with National Gas Transmissions to design, build and deliver a solution that was on time and complete for our part of the project. So this is an example of where we've worked with different stakeholders within the project to offer not just solution components, but also design and deliver a full system to spec. It's an interesting market, especially with this test going ahead and being successful, and with the government currently looking at the blending ratios with a 2% ratio, where previously there was talks about higher blending capacities, which we still hope will be the case in future. Next slide, please. So somewhere where we've seen a lot of success in terms of a lot of customers, a lot of assistance on design leading to orders and supply has been with electrolyzers. It could be due to a lot of the electrolyzer companies out there have got a lot of private investment behind them, so they're not waiting for as much legislation to be able to get the funding, and also that in the grand scheme of things, if we're looking at hydrogen supply, electrolyzers are a key part of that value chain. So yeah, it's the start of the value chain in terms of making sure there's hydrogen to power hydrogen designed products. As you can see in this presentation, there's 3 main types of electrolyzers, so alkaline, proton exchange membrane, and solid oxide cell systems. They all have their pros and cons, which is why it's a very interesting and fast moving market for us, because we're seeing a lot of companies coming out with different technologies, building pilot plants, and even going into full production, as you will have heard in the news recently. Again, purity and efficiency is a key metric for electrolyzers, so leak-free solutions are critical for use here. One place where we've come into our own in terms of small bore fluid systems is with our technical and local assistance. So we've been able to work with some of the major electrolyzer manufacturers within the UK, offering P&ID reviews, design recommendations, not just due to savings in reducing the amount of components, but also to reduce their system footprint, as this is a key strategy for system manufacturers currently in the electrolyzer industry. Next slide, please. So in summary, we work across many different markets within the hydrogen and clean energy sector. We've seen global growth across these markets, which has given us a bit of a success story, and we've been able to invest further in local hydrogen skills. So we've got field engineering teams who can come to your site or work with you remotely via Teams to look through designs and improve, or look to give an opinion on these. And also globally, we've been able to employ market leaders who work in the States or in other countries due to where we're based, who can, we can get on the phone to assist you at another higher level within these markets. yeah, so please do reach out after this meeting with any queries about this presentation or anything else. And I'm sure, well, looking forward to working and being part of this consortium moving forwards. Thank you.